What's up, YouTube? Capital G here, doing another episode of Hope for Rogue Players, and this time we are looking at scraps. I am shocked that I'm even saying that, because if you guys are not familiar with scraps, they are a 5Ds archetype. Off the top of my head, I think they came out in like 2010. I know they came out in Duelist Revolution, which is a super old set. I mean, you're talking about when Pot of Duality and Effect Driller were first came into the game. They're a synchro archetype, and they're kind of like the first archetype that really kind of put an emphasis on destroying your own cards and basically being able to plus off of that. I mean, yeah, in today's Yu-Gi-Oh, we have things like Metaphors and Fire Kings and Cosmos and Yang Zings that all want to do that, but you know, this was kind of like the originator. So Johnny Wynn, aka Aznpersuasion, actually ended up getting 32nd place at a Houston, Texas regional, which is mind-blowing because the damn event was almost 400 players, and I believe he went 7-2, and this actually got him his invite to next year's North American WCQ. Let's look at what he actually ran. Now, if you're unfamiliar with scraps, yes, they like to blow their own cards up, but some newer cards have actually made blowing your cards up just a lot more beneficial. It used to be where kind of just the tuners would get you other monsters back to your hand, but now because they have obviously Supply Squad, which this card came out a lot later than when these scraps were first were first given to us, but then they got another card called Scrap Factory, and these two cards work in conjunction so beautifully. You guys probably know about Supply Squad. It's not a card that ever saw a lot of play, but I always thought it was an amazing card, and it basically says if a monster on your side of the field is destroyed, it doesn't even have to go to the graveyard, you get to draw a card. And this is really cool because a lot of times it'll just kind of mind fuck your opponent into not blowing up your stuff. Your opponent will think, I really need to get rid of this Scrap Dragon, but do I want to let this guy draw a card, knowing that the Scrap Dragon is going to give him another monster as well? And then you kind of have the card that just makes the entire deck, which is Scrap Factory. Scrap Factory makes Goblin so much better. It makes Orthros actually a playable card, because when a scrap is destroyed by a card effect and sent to the graveyard, you get to summon a scrap monster from your deck, and it can be this big behemoth, which is Scrap Goblin is basically a monster reborn on crack. Not only does it have really good stats, but you can actually summon monsters to your opponent's side of the field. And this is important because a lot of times what you'll do is, let's say they have a couple of monsters in defense mode and they're trying to like hide or something like that, but you know they don't actually have any, you know, like real defense or anything. They don't have any mirror forces or any actual traps. What you can do is you can actually summon Goblin to their side of the field in attack mode, and this little sucker cannot be destroyed by battle. He has 0 attack, so you basically just ram all your monsters into the Scrap Goblin, and it's essentially the same as if they were taking direct attacks. Now, there's some other cool cards in this deck, like Scrap Storm. Any old school players are going to know Scrap Storm. If you've ever even tried to play the deck, you know this is one of the most essential cards. This card works best with the tuners because all the tuners have effects where when they're sent to the graveyard by a scrap effect, so it can be your own cards like Scrap Dragon, or it can be like Scrap Storm, then they let you add one of your scraps. It can't be a copy of themselves, but it lets you add one of those to the from the graveyard to the hand. Then since this deck basically has a Wolf Bark in Scrap Chimera, that's the way that you activate it. Like, you get your Chimera and you just trigger him over and over and over again. Now, Chimera does kind of have the downside that you can only synchro summon into a scrap monster, so you can bring back all your level 4s, but you can only go into scrap, so it makes it a little more difficult to go into things like Stardust Dragon or Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend. He didn't even run Stardust Dragon, which kind of makes sense because he doesn't run any like real defensive cards, no Book of Moons or Solemn or anything like that. But what it does is the way that you can also get around that is, obviously, guys, you know that the Exceed mechanic came out after Scraps did, so there's nothing saying that you can't exceed into like Utopia the Lightning, Diamond Dire Wolf, Castell, etc., etc. And again, Diamond Dire Wolf obviously shines in this deck because we've been talking about how this deck likes to blow its own monsters up. A lot of times, if you blow your own monster up, you'll draw a card, you'll be able to summon a monster from the graveyard. Now, one cool thing about this deck that a lot of people do not know, a lot of people, when you summon the big boss monsters like Scrap Dragon and Scrap Trend Dragon, they will try and use Solemn Strike on these things. They will try and use Solemn Warning. You do not ever want to do that because these guys will actually trigger. Yes, even if you negate the summon of them and you destroy them, they will still actually trigger. It's the same thing as Light and Darkness Dragon. The card is still technically considered to be destroyed by your card effect, even though its summon was negated. Grandmaster of the Six Samurai works the same exact way. if you solemn warning a Grandmaster, your opponent just puts the Grandmaster back in their hand and they special summon it again. So this guy, like the Scrap Dragon, if you end up using like solemn warning or you try and strike it, essentially a lot of times what they'll do is they'll just get Golem. They'll reborn the monster that they used initially, which is probably like, you know, Scrap Goblin or something. They'll just go into like a second copy and you're basically just out a whole bunch of life points, and obviously they can still use the effect as well. Now, one of the cool things about this deck, much like Yang Zing, one of the few decks that actually main decks Dark Hole. Dark Hole works in this deck because obviously we've been talking about how the deck wants to blow its own cards up, and Johnny actually built this deck to go second, which is kind of smart because it is a combo deck, and you know, scraps have been a little power creep, not necessarily because they're bad, just because the two things that they do really well when it comes to like the big boss monsters, Twin, and the regular Scrap Dragon, they kind of require you to blow monsters up on your opponent's side of the field and target. And you guys know that we've had long periods of time where those two things have just felt like they are just out of the game and they've been taken out of the game completely. Obviously, Magic Specters and the big Cosmo ships, they can't be targeted at all. And then, you know, post Duelist Alliance, guys, when Konami for some reason released Yang Zings and Shadows and Burning Abyss all in the same set, like Destruction was just terrible. That's the reason why people stopped playing Torrential Tribute, because you didn't want to Torrential Tribute Burning Abyss or Shadows. You would just end up losing cards. So, you know, scraps were definitely unplayable during those periods of time, but it's cool to see them actually come back in a super fast, aggressive version. The only trap in this damn deck is Call to Haunted, which I do actually think makes sense because it does bring back the big behemoth, the dragons, which obviously you can only kind of summon them back with, you know, Call to Haunted. Now, if you're wondering why he did run 3 of each, it's because, as we've said before, whenever these guys are destroyed by scrap effects, and they probably will be, whether that be another copy of like the dragons or a scrap storm, you get to add this card to your hand. So a lot of times you'll just be bouncing this card over and over and over again, and you just want to be able to put pressure on your opponent. Like, you want to be able to go into a scrap dragon every single turn and know that if they have strikes, they're just, you know, they're fucked. If they use them, doesn't matter. You're just going to make another scrap dragon anyway. So this is a really cool deck. It's good to see scraps having some success. I don't think that this can be replicated, this performance, but I did want to highlight it to give you rogue duelists out there some hope. So if you guys enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you guys have not already. Thank you guys for watching.